and more about program construction. Because when you look at strength and conditioning as a field, it's all about how do you put together full programs that are weeks, months, years, and in the case of, say, Olympians that might be coming and doing canoeing and paddling, both in slalom and in flat water sports, they have 4-year programs. So that's the kind of stuff that I wanted to talk to you all about today. What is strength and conditioning as a field? It's a branch of physiology. So what we're doing is we're looking at stimuli that we can apply to different parts of the body, say the endocrine system, your musculoskeletal system, your neurological systems, so we can get different adaptations that we're really looking for. And the kind of adaptations that we're looking for are generally applied to reducing injury. We want to improve performance, and we want to, in certain instances, we want to make the loads or the disease risk for the populations that we're working with easier. And this talk is a little bit challenging to put together because there's a wide variety of people that we might be working with. So there might be people coming in here from outdoor recreation fields like Knowles and Outward Bound who they have 16 weeks, something like that, before they have people going on a trip, and it's a one-time thing. There's also recreational people that want to get out every weekend or so and do their own program. And then there's actual competitive people that have a fully set schedule, like this race is going to be June 6th, this second race is going to be July 7th, then we got 2 in August, that sort of thing. So we'll be talking about what kind of things we can do for those different populations. And then at the bottom you'll see what works best. That's really what I would like to talk about today, and this is what we're going to be looking into for testing, periodization, specificity, and injury prevention. So these are going to be broadly the 4 topics that we're going to be going over. What are they? How are they useful? How can you incorporate them into your own programming or into the programming of your clients? So the first thing I want to talk about is specificity. And it's kind of a law in exercise physiology that if you have an athletic endeavor that you would like to participate in, then you need to create programs and structures that are going to elicit responses that are most closely related to the type of activity that you would like. So classic examples, if I had a power lifter or an Olympic lifter getting ready for the biggest competition of the year, for instance, I have a friend who just competed at the Arnold's last week, and he took first place in his weight class, deadlifted 880 pounds. What would I make that guy do? I'm not going to make him go out jogging. Similarly, if I have someone who's trying to prepare for a marathon, it would be silly for me to make them do heavy deadlifts, heavy clean and jerks to get ready for their athletic events. So a lot of time has been spent by researchers looking into what kind of energy systems are used by competitive canoeists, kayakers, both in slalom and in flat water, outrigger disciplines. Not as much stand-up paddleboarding. In fact, I was only able to find 1 published article on stand-up paddleboarding for the energy requirements of that sport. So there's room to grow in the field, and hopefully if money is thrown in behind it from outdoor recreation groups, and we can get better research, determine better programming, and continue moving forward. So what kind of energy requirements are used in paddle sports? So generally speaking, the body has 3 primary mechanisms for developing energy. We have what's called the phosphagen system. If you were to think about it in terms of an analogy, it's like a broad pan that's very shallow. You use a lot of energy in a very short period of time. It's very simple. That energy system lasts about 6 to 10 seconds. Usain Bolt uses it. Powerlifters will use it. The second one is the glycolytic system. It's a medium length, medium power system. You can burn it out in roughly 2 to 3 minutes depending on the type of event. So a 400 race, most of the short distances in the canoe sprint and the kayak sprint, a lot of what's going on during slalom races. And then you have the oxidative system, where you can think about it as like a long, narrow tube. You have almost unlimited resources if you're working at the right energy percent, at the right wattage output, but you don't get it very quickly. So that's what your marathon runners are doing. If you're doing a lot of outdoor expeditionary work, that's what you're using on your portages, crossing lakes, going through multi-day rivers, those kind of events. And when you look into what is your fuel source for each of these systems, the phosphagen system only uses carbohydrates or phosphorates. The glycolytic system can only use carbohydrates. And then the oxidative system can use carbohydrates, fats, and to a much lesser degree, protein. So what should we be focusing on if we're doing flat water and slalom? Flat water is almost entirely an oxidative sport. At the very shortest distances, you would be dipping into your glycolytic system. Because most of the races, even if you go to the Olympic level, for 500 meters, 1,000 meters, and so on, you have people that are working at 70%, 80%, 90% of what we call their VO2 max. But the distances are, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes out. That's the kind of racing that you might see for those kind of events. Slalom is a bit different. So there's only one good study that I was really able to find for slalom paddling. And when you look at the percentage of energy expenditure, you get 50% anaerobic sources, that glycolytic and phosphation system, and you get 50% aerobic sources for your energy supply. So training that uses that energy system would be much more useful for people that are in the slalom discipline. So when we're using the specificity principle for more than just our endurance training, we also want to make sure that we pick exercises that are going to be mimicking the kind of activities that we would see whether we're doing slalom paddling, whether we're doing flat water paddling, or if you're here for portaging, actions that will mimicking that as well. And a big thing that's going to come up later on in the talk is that adaptations are local or global for cardiovascular training. So you can think about it like this. You break down the kind of adaptations that you see for cardiovascular endurance training. You have adaptations for the heart, the lungs, the brain, and then you have adaptations that occur in the legs, the arms, and other musculature. If you train only your legs, it does not have a crossover effect for your peripheral adaptations to your arms. And if you train only your arms, it does not cross over to your legs. But whatever you do for the heart always works for the heart. So that is the specificity principle in action. Specifics also apply to what kind of muscles we're going to be using. What are the prime movers when we're doing our paddle sports? The prime movers are generally going to be the biggest muscles of your upper body, the pectoralis major, the latissimus dorsi, and your traps. So as you can see here, can people in the back see some of the imagery? Okay, this is a superficial cut right here and then a deep cut. So this trap, the one that you're going to see on most people, is a big diamond shape. Then the lats are a large muscle that goes from your shoulders all the way down to your low back. And on the other side, if I were to flip this person over, you've got your pecs. Those are the three largest muscles for generating power during paddle sports, because the latissimus dorsi, the pectoralis major, and the trapezius all have a role in extension of the shoulder in the power position. They're the ones that are going to be generating the most work. Additionally, we have other muscles that are doing a lot of work for us as well. Your core muscles, your rectus abdominis, aka your six-pack, your internal and external obliques have a lot of role too, because part of your power generation is from torso rotation. And then the other thing that they're going to be doing is controlling roll, pitch, and yaw. Raise your hand if you're familiar with those three terms. I should see more hands going up than that. Come on, guys. So the rolls, the pitch, and the yaws are the three actions that a boat does. So a roll, imagine that you see the bow coming towards you. A roll is the boat rolling from side to side. A pitch would be the boat coming back and forth, say over a wave. And then the yaw is the horizontal change of the bow's angle over the water. If you want to be the most efficient paddler on the water, ideally, those three numbers, if you were to put them into vector forces, would come down to zero, so that you would have a straight line going directly over the water. Now, your core is going to be mostly involved in controlling those three motions as well as generating power for the pushing. So if you are rolling from side to side, it's showing me that your core is not strong enough to stabilize the boat as it's moving over the water. If it's pitching back and forth, it means that you have a lot of extraneous motion moving side to side as well. Sorry, forward and back as well. The other thing people often forget about are your forearms and your hands. Believe it or not, you don't have any muscles in your fingers. Did anybody here know that? So there's no muscles in the fingers, it's all tendons. So all of the muscles that actually make a fist originate up by the elbow. And since your hand is the point of contact between your body and the blade, and then by extension, the blade into the water, the amount of force and the amount of grip and the health of your forearms and your hands is often going to dictate the amount of power that you can generate from the body into the water. You can kind of think about it like a whipping action. So if the hand and the forearm is the last point of contact, if it's inefficient, you're losing all of that power that you've generated in your core, in your pecs, lats, and traps, and it's dissipated while you've been paddling. Part of what we also want to look at is not just which muscles you're working, but what kind of actions are they doing when you're putting together an exercise program. So a concentric action is when a muscle shortens in length and creates force. So if you're doing bicep curls, it's the up phase of the bicep curl. An eccentric action is when a muscle lengthens and creates force. So if you're doing the bicep curl, it's the down phase of that curl. The third kind of action that muscles create are called isometric actions, where they're creating force and they're holding it in position. Think of a plank or just holding the biceps in your, holding those dumbbells at a 90-degree angle for, say, 30 seconds. So those are isometric forces. And in paddling, we are almost exclusively using concentric and eccentric actions. Our eccentric actions are the ones that we'd be training in order to avoid rolling over, flipping the boat, when we're doing our bracing, our catching, that kind of action. The concentric actions are what we're actually going to be using to generate force to propel the boat forward. So if you're putting together a program, the likelihood of needing to use isometric exercises is very low. You can focus just on the eccentric stuff so that you can minimize injury, and you can focus on the concentric stuff so that you can work on improving your power output. So those are our prime movers. What we also want to look at are assisting muscle groups. The rotator cuff would be on the backside. The rotator cuff, if you've ever heard about them, they're always what gets injured in baseball players, a lot of football players. Those are very important muscles because there are a group of 3 small muscles on the backside of your shoulder that reach around to the front of it, and then they allow you to do a high five. They're very important for injury prevention. They're also very important when you're picking the paddle back up out of the water and returning it to the starting position. 2, we have the deltoid. So your deltoid is that big muscle that surrounds the entirety of the shoulder. It has a role in all aspects of your paddle stroke. Bringing it forward, out to the side, and then down into the water. Thirdly, we have the serratus anterior, which is this feather-like muscle right here on the ribs. If you see someone that's really jacked, like one of the guys that's going to show up in one of these photos. Oh, I can actually back up. Just 1 or 2. So this guy, right there. This guy, he's super ripped, so you can see his serratus anterior looking like feathers. That's a very important muscle for scapular stabilization. So if your scapula is a muscle, your scapula is a bone that's on the backside of your upper body, and if it's not stabilized, it's one of those other locations where you dissipate energy. You can think about it like a platform from whence your lats and your pecs and your traps are going to be pulling and pushing from. And then the last big muscle group that we'd be looking at that have a smaller role but also very important are your back extensors. So your glute max, the big muscle on your backside. You've got your erector spinae, your multifidus, quadratus lumborum. You don't have to break them into those 4 specific muscles when you're putting together a program. Just know that every muscle that's going to be extending your back has a very important role when you're putting together your programming. Now, injury prevention. A lot goes into injury prevention. For just about every single discipline of paddling, whether it's flat water, whether it's white water, outrigger canoeing, the 3 most injured parts of your body are in order: your shoulder, your low back, and then your wrist, forearm, and elbow. The biggest predictors that we have for when someone's going to get injured is 1, the longer the distances that you paddle, and then 2, the asymmetry between your limbs. Asymmetry between your limbs meaning the difference between their flexibility and the strength. If your right hand is much more flexible than your left hand, you're much more likely to injure that left hand when you're paddling. So people that are in sprint disciplines and slalom disciplines are much less likely to injure their shoulders, low back, wrist, forearms, simply because they don't have the